Hello, welcome to JetTalks. Today I'm joined with Mr. Chet Comfort, our Field CTO. Chet, thanks for being here.
Hey, Jim, thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. So Chet, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I recently came aboard to Jetstor about 2 months ago. Prior to Jetstor, I was working in consulting. And prior to that, I had a couple interesting stints working in the DoD, working at large technology companies like IBM Red Hat, and bounced around a number of industry topics, but for some reason always ending up back in storage, right? Storage is just an interesting passion of mine, and it's just a very timely topic nowadays with the advent of AI and retrieval augmented generation and just the world of benefit and the fact that at the end of the day, the most interesting thing about the trends that we're seeing in the market right now is that storage now becomes the digital gold, right? It becomes the competitive differentiator that's enabling new business opportunities. And, I believe Jetstor has the right tools to help us figure out how to extract that value for companies.
Hey man, it's really fantastic to have you here. I forget that you are also an ex-IBMer. We have that in common.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
scars run deep.
Yeah, that never goes away. So, what made you, beyond just this kind of digital gold aspect, what made you want to come on to Jetstor?
Yeah, sure. So, what's interesting about my relationship with Jetstor is I've known Jetstor for, oh man, well over 12, 13 years now.
Yeah, longer than me.
Yeah, longer than you've been CEO, which is incredible, right? Now, my relationship goes way, way back. Actually, what I call my first big boy job out of grad school. I was working for a pretty impactful storage focused value added reseller out of Massachusetts, and through my alignment and my grooming in that organization, I got exposed to a number of different storage technologies, working with a number of interesting startups and working with kind of the big names in tech at the time, right? The Dells and HPs of the world. And, one day, the founder comes strolling through the door, Gene, and Gene's a character. And, it left a lasting impression on me. The fact that, hey, look, in this field of monsters, of giants, there's this lowly little company here who's really offering something genuinely disruptive at a hyper disruptive price point that's actually solving problems. And it made me realize that, it's always fun to talk about Lamborghinis and Ferraris in the world of digital storage, but sometimes you just need a Corolla, right? and the Corolla will last you probably longer than that Ferrari that you bought, right, and burn through it. So yeah,
it's funny. Everyone has a similar story about meeting Gene for the first time.
Yeah.
He's just someone you can't forget.
No, hopefully we can do another one of these with Gene on, and everyone will get a chance to meet Gene as well.
Yeah, I really like that analogy about cars. It's one that I really use pretty frequently when I'm talking to customers, because I think for whatever reason, maybe because we all have to drive a car at some point, but it really matches I'd say the intricacies of storage, right? In that there's a wide variety of options to get from point A to point B. Not even just a car, right? You can take a bike, you can take a train, and they'll all get you there. You can take a fighter jet if you want, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's fundamental trade-offs you have to make with any of those decisions. When it comes to which type of storage, which configuration. So yeah, it's a great metaphor.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's one that I stole from this guy actually. So I'm not gonna lie. So great minds, right? Great minds. No, but that's the funny thing in storage is that storage is nothing new. It's been around since the age of computing, right? It's funny when I get a chance to sit down and talk with Gene, our founder. He goes back and he tells me stories about the first arrays, right? I think we're on the 9th generation of our platform. But going back to the first and second arrays where he was populating 1 gigabyte drives, right, in our arrays. And now we're looking at drives into the 32 and plus terabytes in spinning disk and over 100 terabytes in flash and NVMe. It's incredible just how the trajectory of storage has grown tremendously. But at the end of the day, the one constant is the fact that the protocols fundamentally have evolved, but they haven't changed, and how the applications themselves are taking advantage of this evolutionary step, not a revolutionary step, right?
Yeah, that was one thing that was really fascinating to me about coming into Jetstor in a leadership role. Was, my background prior to coming to the company was more in like the cloud space and in still HPC, but definitely more in the software side.
Mm-hmm.
But I started my career as a systems administrator, like doing the same stuff, like racking and stacking physical hardware boxes, and revisiting all that stuff and the terminology. I was like, this stuff, it really hasn't changed that much in the 20 years since I've been doing it. There's been, of course, evolutionary changes and different types of media, and the drives have gotten bigger and faster. But at the end of the day, like, storage is really still kind of storage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's unfortunately not the sexiest thing to talk about, but it runs the world, right? Even as everyone is hyper focused now coming out of GTC with NVIDIA and talking about 600 kilowatt hour racks, not thinking about 1 megawatt racks. At the end of the day, those racks are kind of useless unless you're talking to some type of storage. You can crunch numbers all day, but at the end of the day, that stuff has to persist somewhere, right? And what I found really interesting was some of the slides that Jensen put up in regards to the ecosystem of storage, right? And you look at the breadth and depth of that ecosystem, it's huge, right? You're talking about, incredible companies like DDN and NetApp and Nutanix and all these folks that have been around for so long, that have been really keen and focused on things around high performance computing, that are now getting a second breath and a second chance at life to actually drive this digital revolution. What I find really interesting about that is that at the end of the day, you need a Ferrari to drive a fighter jet to kind of keep up. But at the end of the day, right, all that value needs to persist and store and stay somewhere, right? So everyone's hyper-focused on driving velocity, but there's still a conversation need to be had around the value side of that equation, right? So I think of different tiers of storage aside from just the tier ones that everyone's hyper-focused on today, right? I'm thinking about tier 2 and tier 3 storage that are typically orders of magnitude larger in capacity over time than just the tier ones.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that people, I think, underestimate the complexity that goes into storage as a topic, right? Especially in the cloud era, where things are more or less obfuscated, especially from like a developer perspective.
Yeah, I call it a universal abstraction plane.
Where it's like, hey, I just have an HTTP endpoint and I'm going to dump a bunch of objects in there, and it's just going to be fantastic. And like, for the most part, I think for a wide variety of use cases, like, that kind of mentality works. But when you start getting, the devil's always in the details, right? As you alluded to, in these, especially like AI and HPC use cases, where, you need your tier 1 storage that needs to be able to, fill the GPU pipelines, as quickly as possible. But like, once it's done, once it's generating, all this content, to your point, it's got to live somewhere. And architecting these solutions to take advantage of that, if people don't consider that, they can really end up shooting themselves in the foot from a business objective standpoint, where the tech is such that we can do all these things, but at what cost, right?
Exactly.
And so I think having that conversation about not only like the art of the possible, but the art of the feasible gets lost a little bit in this world.
This race of value. Everyone is just hyper focused on this kind of FOMO mentality. I actually was just listening to a podcast recently that focused on AI and the implementation of AI, more interestingly than just the theory of AI. And there's this concept of FOMO versus FOMO, a fear of messing up versus fear of missing out. And it's funny not funny, but it's just interesting that right now at this point in the junction of modern technology, that people are struggling with both, right? This fear of not only missing out from a business perspective, but for the implementers, the fear of messing up, right? What happens if you over-provision GPUs? What happens if you over-provision your storage? What happens if you overrun a cost budget, right? Can the business swallow it? Is it digestible? Is it something that's feasible, right? And I think right now a lot of businesses are struggling, or not struggling, but they're aware, keenly aware, that their AI strategies have a velocity component to it today. But over time, as the business grapples and starts stabilizing what becomes the true value that they're getting out of these technologies, there's going to be a pretty drastic inflection point that's going to drive, I think, a lot of this innovation probably back on-prem, back to something that is much more manageable, much more cost-focused, much more digestible, and frankly, sustainable.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. My last role prior to joining Jetstor was in the kind of FinOps ecosystem, where for folks that aren't aware, FinOps is a burgeoning professional field where finance is really still, 10, 20 years later into the cloud boom, like just starting to wrap their heads around like, how do we manage the cost implications of, running workloads in the cloud? And the biggest
So
feedback,
it's like next-gen accounting?
essentially, yeah. Like I think the DevOps portmanteau really like did a number on the world ever since. But really like getting finance involved in IT spend, like it used to be a pretty straightforward conversation. Like we need this many dollars of hardware over, this type of capital expenditure, and the CFOs were, happy to crunch those numbers and figure out, pretty straightforward kind of cash flow calculations. But now in the cloud world, everything is so dynamic, and developers can just spin up, what they want kind of willy-nilly, to the point where the biggest challenge that a lot of these companies have in the cloud world is predictability. It's not even like cost management. It's just, I have no idea what my bill's going to be month to month, right? Let alone year over year or 5 years from now. And it's a huge challenge that requires, tooling, manpower. They're essentially building the plane as they're flying it right now in the FinOps world, just trying to grapple this problem. And that started even before the advent of AI, right? When any developer can just spin up, like a data center's worth of infrastructure with a couple lines of code, like you got to be careful with that stuff, right? So I really couldn't agree with you more to your prediction that people are going to kind of wise up to the fact that the cloud is not so much a technology as it's really just a business model and a consumption model. And businesses are really going to have to think hard about like what consumption model of IT makes sense from all of these factors, right? Velocity, cost predictability.
The elasticity, the flexibility, all the idiots I call them.
Yeah. But even like, I was really fortunate to work at, in the hyperscaler world, and they were very pragmatic and insistent when you pitch the value prop of the cloud, like don't say it's cheaper, because it's not. I think when we all started, it was like, oh, you just pay for what you use and turn it off when you're done. But I always used to say it's like
the dirty little secret is that nobody turns it off.
It's like my kid and the lights in the house. It's like every single light in my house is always on. You know what I mean? They're never turning the lights off.
I mean, no, it's a funny world that we live in, right? But at the end of the day, right, I take a point to say, at the end of the day, cloud is not the enemy. Frankly, it is not the enemy. It should be in everyone's best interest to actually lean into it, right? Working at the private side of hybrid cloud, right? The objective, the value proposition, is fundamentally this idea of having your cake and eating too, right? The ability to leverage the right tool for the right job and drive the velocity when you need it, the innovation cycles as you can, as fast as possible to create that competitive differentiator. But then, cut your CFO a break and then give him an opportunity to optimize, right? The name of the game is optimization at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the most clever companies will take that approach going forward, where they understand that the value prop of the cloud is in the velocity. You can develop an MVP that scales very, very rapidly without having to go through your company's internal procurement process to not even know if whatever you're building is going to have any traction in the market, right? So you can leverage the cloud for what it does best, but when you start hitting scale and running these workloads at scale, the bills start racking up really fast, and you got to have a plan to repatriate that workload back to on-prem when it starts to make sense. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to take note of appropriateness of workload, right? I think there's a trend that I'm seeing now in my conversations with our customers is this focus on right place, right job, right? So once things hit a maturity where there's more predictability, I think that's where the FinOps folks are really taking advantage to say, okay, now that we have some level of predictability, where we can at least have some margin of error that is within tolerance, that it may make sense to go and explore more hybrid options, right? To see what a hybrid stretch would look like, not just a full-on repatriation, but saying maybe we don't need to run our backups in the cloud, right? Maybe it makes more sense to strip that out, or maybe have a multi-cloud or a poly-cloud methodology where we can balance out our risk, we can balance out our tolerances, and balance cost more effectively, and allow essentially a new model to effectively negotiate for better pricing, right? So if you have at least some functionality of the structure on-prem, that becomes your base, right? You know what the lowest tier is, right? And then from there, you have every other cloud that you can pick from. And now with the advent of modern application systems like Kubernetes, with overlay technologies and networking, right, you have the ability to now stretch your application platforms across multiple clouds and create a unified experience where your storage, your compute, your networking, your security, everything now is able to essentially dynamically shift around, and you can now have better cost optimization and play the cost game more effectively, right? It enables the business to have a better tool, a new tool in their arsenal to drive not only value, but a competitive differentiator.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch the cloud race unfold in real time. I think for better or worse, AWS just had a head start on everybody. And, it was really smart to funnel people into their managed services, because it created this essentially almost like a lock-in component where the switching costs were really high. And, the clever folks at Google and Microsoft realized like, hey, we obviously want to be a player in this game as well. And to get around that kind of like vendor lock-in ideas, like let's develop, kind of like cloud agnostic technologies and bring to the market a message of like, there's nothing special about AWS, right? It's just, API wrappers around, again, like the same hardware that everyone else has at the end of the day. So there's like this dynamicism and a push-pull between, like the elephant in the room and then these other guys who are pushing more of a open standard ecosystem, which I think will eventually lead to a more even playing field. On the flip side, right, the race now is what features can we develop as a hyperscaler to like continue to drive that lock-in. So that to me is like what's most exciting about the cloud world is that push-pull between like the open standard folks on one hand, where you can run these same workloads and use those same abstractions in a hybrid environment or a poly-cloud environment to really play like kind of like the price arbitration game, versus the big AWS metric is like how many new features did we release, how many new services did we release, right? Because it's like they are on one hand like really pushing against the commodity idea, and then the other folks in the world are like no, it is a commodity, right? And and just
there's probably a reason why there's been less innovation in the IaaS space of all these clouds, because frankly, it's been solved, right? And it's been solved for a while now. And what I find really interesting is that given the market dynamicism, what's happening right now with things like the VMware Broadcom acquisition, things like the IBM acquisition of Red Hat, the development and the this kind of plethora of new startup-y, what's the best way to explain it? Like niche microclouds that are existing, right? That have unique capabilities or unique value propositions. At the end of the day, everyone's kind of doing the same thing at the infrastructure as a service layer. Yeah, there may be scale components that may be different, but fundamentally, as an engineer, as a developer, right, if I take the approach of leveraging my abstractions properly and I can develop against a common standard, then it unlocks this tremendous value where I can essentially allow my workloads to morph and move at the pace or the want of the business and not have to redevelop or retouch it again.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a really powerful paradigm that I think people are, catching on to, right? Is that if we adopt a, open kind of framework and build off that versus locking into specific vendor tools, like this whole other world opens to you. And it is essentially like a race to the bottom in terms of the value now is like, where can we run these workloads where we can get the most value, right? Just from like a pure cost perspective. And like, I think even the next level.
Well, not even just pure cost, because now you have cost as actually an enabler, right? It becomes the next handle, right, that you can move as a business, because before you just had speed and scale.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the only two things you had to choose from, right? And the color of your cloud.
Yeah.
Right. So you pick your color and then you had speed and scale. And cost was always something that was negotiated or arbitrated in the back end through backdoor deals with your account reps, or if you were at a startup, right, they would hand you over, right, the free cigarettes to get you hooked, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like once you're locked in, you're locked in. But now with this ability to take a vendor neutral approach, right, with the advent of open source technologies and common operating platforms and common abstraction planes, I think now cost becomes this other force multiplier driver for businesses to say, hey, we can actually get all the clouds to play nicely with what we want as a business instead of us playing to their game.
Yeah, like even taking like a broader view, right? There's another wrinkle that's appearing, and it's even just availability, right? Who can get the GPUs? Who can get the data center space to power them?
The power alone.
the power alone, right? I've been to a couple data center conferences where people are just like wringing their hands. Like they're talking about building self-contained nuclear power plants just to like physically create the infrastructure to host these things. Like nukes are back, baby.
Yeah. I love it.
And really just to power a data center.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's really kind of mind-boggling. So that's like, that I think is really another element to this conversation that businesses need to consider, especially when it comes to like what platform to choose or what paradigm to adopt. Is, are you even going to be able to get the stuff that you need? And even for Jetstor, it's challenging for us, and also part of the value prop of us as a company, in that we maintain relationships with all the suppliers in the market. And when it comes to a customer needing the infrastructure to run their workloads, like availability is a big part of it. Like, yeah, it would be great to use the latest and greatest drives, but guess what? Like, there aren't any. And there's not going to be any for a couple months. Like, with that in mind, like, here are your options, Mr. Customer. Like, we're here to help you navigate that. But I think,
knock on wood, there's no more tsunamis. Right?
No more tsunamis or tariffs
or
all these like crazy geopolitical considerations that if you're just a developer trying to spin up an AI thing, like you're like, why do I have to care about this? But the reality, that's like
the ripple effects.
The boots on the ground reality is all this stuff matters. Right at the end of the day, it's
navigating that is not only a challenge, but it's now becomes an effective enabler for a business, is figuring out how to actually execute against all the geopolitical and economic effects that are happening around the world.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate the time that we had today.
Yeah, it's been great.
I look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Chet.